Hello, everyone. We're so happy to have you here with us on the Stronger Marriage webinar, produced by the Utah Marriage Commission, hosted by Utah State University. I'm Alexis Alcott, the UMC Interim Program Coordinator, and we're excited to have you join us today as we celebrate 25 years of marriage celebrations in 2023. A huge part of these celebrations is these webinars, and you guys for participating and coming to them, so thank you so much. In today's webinar, we're excited to be joined by Kayla Mennenga. She grew up in Texas, but calls Utah home now. She has a master's in marriage and family therapy from Abilene. Am I saying that right?
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. Christian University, and a PhD in marriage and family therapy from Brigham Young University, but started that journey at the University of Georgia. She's a licensed marriage and family therapist and an AAMFT approved supervisor. She owns a group therapy practice in Provo, Utah, where the therapists work with clients dealing with a variety of issues. She loves working with couples as they take their journey through healing. She has worked with premarital couples, newlyweds, and couples in all stages of life, having experienced betrayal and trauma. When Kayla's not in the therapy room, she enjoys being outside, spending quality time with the people around her, sitting by a beautiful fire on a crisp night, like tonight, and enjoy watching and playing sports. She can also be a bit of an adventurer and doesn't mind trying new things that get her blood pumping a little bit. In tonight's webinar, you will be helped with a couple of different goals and objectives that have been laid out by Kayla. The goals of this webinar is to firstly help you understand trust and boundaries in relationships, and secondly, learn practical tools for building trust and boundaries. To reach these goals, here are her three objectives. She wants to define concepts, what they are and what they are not, identify trust and boundaries in relationships, and introduce tools and activities to use in sessions. If you have any questions, please ask them by entering your questions to the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. The chat will be turned off during the entirety of the presentation, so this really is the best place to ask her any questions. We'll have a 15-minute Q&A at the end of the presentation, so write down your questions and save them for the end. If you've joined us today for the CEU credit, make sure to stay on until the end of the presentation. The survey needed for your credit will automatically load onto the screen, and then you'll receive an email from the Utah Marriage Commission with your certificate. You may also email into the Utah Marriage Commission, if for some reason it doesn't load, to receive your survey for this webinar. The email for that is marriagecommission@usu.edu. Once the survey is completed, you will obtain an email with your CEU credit certification. We'll now turn the time over to Kayla for her presentation.
Great, thank you, Alexis. I'm going to share my screen with you. I'm excited to be with you all tonight. For reasons I don't know, I'm a little bit more nervous tonight than I usually am. So bear with me as I kind of work through some of these things. I feel like this topic is so broad with a lot of avenues that we could go. And so I tried to, in the little bit of time that we have, I tried to organize this in a way that feels a little bit theoretical, but also gives you some practical things. I know when I sit through different webinars or seminars or just different sessions, I hope to leave with something practical that I can try later. So that's my goal today. I know that we all generally know about trust and boundaries, but I think it's one of the things that we're noticing more and more comes up in our sessions with clients, and also just in our personal lives. So I thought I would just dive a little bit deeper and figure out how can we make these a little bit more practical so that we can use them in session. So as Alexis mentioned, these are the goals and how we're going to accomplish that. I won't go into that anymore, but we'll do a little bit of the theory, a little bit of identifying and understanding, and then, so what do we do in therapy? So why this topic? A little bit about me. So as Alexis said, I'm a marriage and family therapist, and so much of my clientele is around working with couples who are struggling with some sort of trust or they've experienced some betrayal. And so building trust is really difficult. And whenever I notice that trust is a challenge, I see that boundaries are something that have been violated. And so it's really interesting to me that these things kind of go hand in hand. And my work just generally always comes back to trust and boundaries. And in my own life, I've had to also learn how to do this. How do I build trust within myself? How do I build trust with the people around me? And how do I honor myself while also honoring other people? And I've had to do this with all sorts of people in my life, whether it's in my own personal relationships or with my family and friendships. I think this topic of trust and boundaries can resonate with all of us in some sort of area. And I'm focusing on new relationships simply because they don't often come with these big injuries that have happened. So these are tools that you would use at the end of the webinar. These are tools that you would use for building or rebuilding trust. And I'm going to have to skip over like trauma. So when trauma is involved, some other things have to happen before trust can be built. And so we're working with new relationships just for the simplicity of how do we practically do this. And I believe that trust and boundaries are essential in all relationships. And so this is a really important topic for us to be able to navigate. So first, we're going to talk about and understand trust and boundaries. We'll start with trust. And, to talk about trust, we have to talk about boundaries. And you'll notice that a lot of elements go into trust. And the first one that I believe is sort of paramount is boundaries. And these elements that we'll talk about will help you navigate trust with your clients in a little bit more of a concrete way. I think sometimes boundaries and trust are kind of this ambiguous thing that we all know about or have heard about, but it's hard to really pinpoint what they are and define them. Boundaries are an element of trust, as I mentioned, and I believe that boundaries contain an element of what Murray Bowen would say is differentiation, the ability to be linked to someone, but also to be able to stay an individual. Super important for us to know who we are and also be able to share life with the people around us. So we'll talk about definitions and then we'll discuss a little bit about each of them. So what is trust? In essence, trust is something that I give to myself and something that I hold for others. Distrust is present when there is a lack of safety in the relationship. And trust, then we could see is like built over time. How many of us know that trust is important in relationships and it's necessary, but we don't really have adequate words to express or describe or even identify how we recognize trust in relationships? Often we go with this feeling in our gut that trust is there or trust isn't. It's just kind of like this feeling that we have. The challenge with only going with our gut or our feelings sometimes is that our emotions can come and go. And so it's hard to rely on that feeling or an emotion that is attached to trust when it's coming and going. And so together with that intuition and the observable elements of trust, we can help our clients identify and also build trust. And we can help them know when their gut is on track. We can actually do a little gut check, and it's not then just anxiety. It's the actual feeling that something is off, and it's because I can identify this piece that is off of trust. Young couples will often say, well, of course we trust each other, Kayla, like, duh. And, I want to say duh too with them. But as soon as we start talking about it, they struggle to have the words to even know what that trust is. So I just had something pop up on my screen. Um, so in this little part of trust, you can see here this quote from Charles Feltman. And if you are familiar with Brene Brown, she quotes a lot of Charles Feltman, and she talks a lot about trust. And so we'll talk about Brene Brown. And I like this quote that he has here that says, "Trust is choosing to risk making something you value vulnerable to another person's actions." And I think this is a really interesting way for us to consider trust. It doesn't matter if it's ourselves, our words, our emotions, our dreams, our goals, our desires, our attachment, anything that is valuable to us, is we have the option to make that vulnerable to someone else. And when we do that, we are trusting. John Gottman calls building trust sliding door opportunities. And they're built in very small moments. They're not these big, grand gestures. They're little everyday things that sometimes go unnoticed that we're actually building trust. At any given time, he kind of talks about how we have the opportunity to either choose connection or to choose not to connect. And that is our sliding door moment. The moment when that door can just like slide open or slide shut. And it can happen so quickly, and sometimes we miss it. He tells a story about he and his wife and how he's wanting to finish this book, and he thinks he knows who the killer is. And all he really wants to do is kind of get ready for bed and then finish his book. And he looks into the bathroom and he notices that his wife looks sad in the mirror, and she's brushing her hair. And he kind of talks about like, this is a moment, right? This is a sliding door moment where I could either like avert my eyes and pretend I didn't see because I really want to get back to my book, or he could choose to connect. And so he goes in and he takes the brush from her and he says, tell me what's going on. And that is a moment where it's not going to make or break their relationship, but it is a small moment where trust is built because he took the opportunity to choose connection with his wife. Balcom and his colleagues, in their book about helping couples move past an affair, they talk about developing trust, and they talk about how it involves one person putting oneself in a position of uncertainty and seeing what happens. And the risk there is big, right? The risk there is it could be detrimental or it could be really great. And the uncertainty of that feels really scary. And because we aren't generally good at sitting in discomfort, we often choose the thing that's fast to get us out of that or to move us through it, or, to be able to let go of the discomfort as fast as we can. We don't always take the opportunity to trust, which means making this thing that's really valuable to me really vulnerable to you. And it generally is scary. It's this moment of, can I do this? And for new relationships, that feels maybe a little less scary than in later relationships where, injuries have happened or really big ruptures have occurred and betrayal has been present. And so these little moments are different in talking about what trust looks like. But if we can think about trust being something that I hold for someone else, but also trust that I'm giving to someone else, I just love this picture of trust in the hands. Brene Brown states that it's almost imperative that we start trust with ourselves, that it starts with this self-trust. If we don't have self-trust, then it's really hard. And she talks about self-trust as being sort of the result of self-love and self-respect. But she says that if we can't count on ourselves, like if we can't trust ourselves, then we can't ask others to give us what we don't have. And I think that's an interesting concept because often we think about trust as something that somebody else is supposed to do for us, or we think about ways that we can involve the other person. We don't often think about, oh, how am I showing up for myself? Do I trust myself? And when really big things happen, then we really doubt our ability to make decisions or to understand clearly, or we start to guess whether or not it was our fault, or we really search for blame, and often we're the ones that take the blame. And then the more we do that, the less we trust ourselves. And that doesn't have to happen in relationships. That can happen earlier in our life. And so depending on where we come from, we could be in spaces where we don't trust ourselves near as much. And so part of what we'll talk about tonight is how do we do some of these things to actually build trust within ourselves, and then share trust with other partners. So when we think about trust, what we're looking at is, can I count on me? Do I trust me? Do I show up for me? And then there's this relational component, right? So the within and the between experience here. Both of these are important. And I think it's really important too, because this within process is an experience that's hard for a lot of people. And it shows up in boundaries, which we're going to talk about next. But it shows up in boundaries because people feel like, if I care about me, then I must be selfish. I must not be caring for my partner. And it's a distorted cognition. It's a way for us to get in the way of ourselves being able to create the relationships that we want. So let's talk about boundaries. Okay, there we go. So what are boundaries? The dictionary definition here you can see is, boundaries are a line that marks the limits of an area, such as a dividing line. It can also mark the end of something or the beginning of something, but it tends to be a line that stops something. And that's according to the dictionary. And I think we tend to go with this, and I'll kind of talk about that a little bit more. But often people get boundaries and rules mixed up. They kind of make them synonymous, and boundaries are not rules. I think we live in a world where we think that setting boundaries is a way to keep people out, or to create physical distance or physical space. It's a way for us to protect ourselves. But we think we have to like create this physical separation that allows us to have the space that we need. I often speak with clients about how they thought they set a boundary, but then they're disappointed or frustrated, upset, because their partner didn't do what they wanted them to do. And while this is a piece of the definition, this being able to like start and stop something, it works in some cases, but it doesn't necessarily work when we think about emotional boundaries and what the true definition of an emotional boundary is. So I want you to think about boundaries as being something for ourselves. So if I am talking to a young couple who are generally like on cloud nine, they are head over heels, they're sometimes looking at things with rose colored glasses, and we would maybe call them enmeshed in some ways. Not everyone, but a lot of couples kind of present in this way of, what's yours is mine, and we're just together all the time, and we just love each other so much. And that's so great. It's so great. It just isn't sustainable. And so what I talk about is that boundaries are for ourselves. Boundaries are for me. They keep things inside the boundary safe. They are they could be thoughts, they could be behaviors, they could be feelings, they could be experiences, but whatever it is maintained within to keep that safe. If we think about trust and making something vulnerable to somebody else, the boundary is being able to maintain safety here because it's not safe somewhere else, perhaps. And boundaries that are in a relationship allow for emotional safety in those relationships, and they lead to trust, right? So in Brene Brown's book, Dare to Lead, She talks about setting boundaries and the importance of being able to set our boundaries with ourselves and with others. And she says, as this quote states, that daring to set boundaries is about having the courage to love ourselves even when we risk disappointing others. And I think we'll talk about this a little bit more when we look at our interventions, but the challenge to boundaries is that we have to let go of the need to be liked or worrying if people will like us. And we have to let go of the fear of disappointing people. I saw on a social media post not too long ago that this idea that the most important skill that you can have as an adult is the ability to disappoint. And initially we kind of think like, oh, that's not very nice to kind of be in the space of wanting to disappoint, but it's not about wanting to disappoint. It's about being okay and knowing that you're okay if disappointment is part of a relationship. It doesn't mean that I did it wrong. It just means that they have feelings about it, and both of those things can be okay. But that's I think one of the hardest parts about boundaries in relationships is that generally the lack of boundaries is due to a variety of things, but the lack of boundaries can be due to like low self-esteem or low confidence, fears and worries and people pleasing and all sorts of things. So when we think about boundaries in that sense, it's hard. Part of that process is letting go of some of these fears. So when we think about leading into, we'll kind of stick with some identification and some understanding, and then this is part of the intervention here. But a lot of things that I have couples do really are informed by these two acronyms by Brene Brown and John Gottman. And it just allows for us to have some concrete things that we can put words to, behaviors that happen, and reasons why trust is either there or not there. And so for Brene Brown, she talks about in her Dare to Lead book, this acronym of braving. And she has a great video on Google, online that you can Google called Brene Brown Braving. And it's generally the first video that pops up. It's maybe about 10 minutes, but she talks about the anatomy of trust. And in this video, she talks about these 7 things. So I'm just going to briefly go over these with you. Maybe a lot of you have heard this, so I won't spend too much time here. But boundaries is the ability to set boundaries that are clear, and boundaries just indicate what's okay and what's not okay for me, and why. And then that is both like setting my own boundaries and respecting somebody else's boundaries. Reliability, she talks about, is you doing what you say you'll do. And at work, this means staying aware of your competencies and your limitations so that you don't overpromise and are unable to follow through. You want to be able to deliver on your commitments. Reliability also is the ability to balance priorities, right? To be able to follow through and do what you say you're going to do every single time. Accountability is simply you owning your mistakes and apologizing for them and then making amends. The vault, and this is an interesting one, and one that I hadn't necessarily considered from both aspects of this, but the vault is essentially that you don't share the things that people tell you, right? You keep them private or confidential. And I want to be able to know that what I share with you is kept secret or private or confidential. And I'm going to keep those things safe as well. And then she also talks about this other side of the vault where we have people maybe who tell us the things that they hear. They tell us everybody else's things. And what happens is it breaks down trust because we see what they're saying about other people. And then we no longer can trust that the things that we say are actually held in confidence. And so not only am I telling somebody else's stuff, not even my own, but am I telling somebody else's stuff that should really be kept safe and confidential? So there are these two aspects here. Integrity, she talks about, is choosing courage over comfort choosing what's right over what's fun, fast, or easy, and then practicing your values, not just confessing them. And I think this is huge, because I think so many times we do things because it's fast, or we do things because it's easier, we do things because it's what we know, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it fits with our values. Maybe it's a behavior that we've come to just do automatically, or it's part of our internal working model, but it's not really the thing that we would prefer to do. Non-judgment in relationships, she talks about this as a way of being able to ask for what I need, or asking for help, and then you can do the same. We can do this, we can talk about these things without judgment in the relationship or in the conversation. The last one is generosity, and she talks about this as being able to extend the most generous interpretations to intentions. So whether that's, our being able to make a generous interpretation of like our intentions, our words, or our actions of others, and then hoping that they'll make the generous assumption about ours as well. And in this braving acronym, and we'll kind of talk about this in the interventions, but this is just used as a conversation that can walk us through different elements of trust that give us a concrete way of being able to be curious, to learn, and to connect through them. You can see in these two acronyms, I'm not going to go over John Gottman's because they're pretty well there, but the A in attune is for an awareness of your partner's emotion. T is turning toward the emotion, not running or withdrawing from it. Being able to tolerate different viewpoints. U is understanding your partner, or at least putting an effort to do that. 5 is non-defensiveness. And 6 is being able to have empathy in your responses and in the conversations. And you can see that there is some overlap here between the two. And depending on whatever the presenting problem is, or depending on your couple, you can use these in a variety of ways, which we'll go to next. So interventions. So we got to get to this place where we're like, okay, this is all great information, but now what? What does this actually look like in session? And because boundaries and trust are generally this sort of vague idea, but super important, we don't always know how to actually do those in session. And so here are some interventions that I'll use. The A versus the H frame. And I use this to identify the lack of trust and lack of boundaries in relationships. And this is an experiential activity that I do. And to be honest, I don't know where I heard this, but I have done this for a super long time. I'm sure I heard it when I was in graduate school, but that's been so long ago now. But the A versus H. So I'll have the two people get up, and we'll kind of clear the room as much as we can. And I will have them start in an A frame. And what that means is that they stand, I have them stand far enough back where they have to really lean in and kind of hold each other up. And in this A frame, we talk about what this feels like, the pressure of this, the inability to really move very much without impacting your partner. We talk about like, what's the impact of this in their relationship? We talk about experiences, and we do that all while they're holding the A. And after about maybe 5 minutes, they generally ask me if we can stop because it's so uncomfortable. And what they realize is that this is how their relationship feels all the time. And so no wonder they are experiencing some distress. For new couples, we talk about this in terms of prevention. Feel what this feels like. How have you noticed this already? And we talk about like being able to move to an H frame from the A frame so that their relationship is a little bit more balanced, so that there is evidence of trust and boundaries. So we talk about, the experiences of those. We talk about how they wish it could feel. We talk about, when they're in this pressure point and one partner falls, because of the way that they're holding each other up, they both fall. And so we talk about what does that look like when that happens. It looks like when, my partner has a bad day at work. Yes, they come home and they're grumpy, or they're short with me, and I don't really know how to talk to them. And so then I kind of become grumpy. I worry, and I start to have a bad day too. But my day was going just fine, but all of a sudden now I'm also having a bad day. And so we talk about that. And depending on the couple, I don't let them go out of that until we're really kind of done talking about it. And so it can be a long time. But the experience of that just feels real. They feel the pressure of that. And so when I have them go to an H frame, which is standing straight up, a good amount of space away, but they can reach to each other and they can touch. And we generally talk about, okay, so what does this feel like compared to the A? What does this feel like compared to feeling all of the pressure? And we kind of joke because sometimes their arms are already tired, and so they don't want to hold their arms out for very long. But we talk about, what would this look like in your relationship? And this is where we start to identify, well, I wouldn't feel like I had to give up everything that I need in order to help my partner feel better. Or I wouldn't feel like I needed to do everything for them because I could just trust that they would be able to do it at some point. And we start to identify some of these worries and fears, or expectations even, that start to show up in their relationship, whether it's a new relationship or an old relationship. You can kind of start to see some of these behavioral patterns in their relationship, even early on in their relationship. So that's my A frame versus my H frame experience. And everything we do generally kind of builds on each other. So I'll have them do the A versus the H frame, and then we'll talk about braving, like how can we shift the A to the H by using some of these braving acronyms. So it all kind of builds on each other, and it allows for them to understand the experience, but also be able to put practical and concrete things to what they're doing. For the inventory of braving, I will, depending on our time, what's been going on, already in session, I might have given them homework to watch a video, but they, 3 sessions, they still haven't watched the video. So I'll just take the time sometimes in session to show them this 10-minute video. And while they're watching the video, I have them kind of think about themselves. Like, where do they see that they could be doing better in some of these? We identify, once the video is over, we identify the top 2 areas where they feel like, I really kind of stink in this, and I can see where maybe I'm not building trust because I'm not reliable. I don't really follow through with the things that I said I do. I just keep leaving my socks on the floor, and I keep telling her I'm going to pick them up, but I just don't. And so they're like, I can see where I'm not reliable. Or I keep saying I'm going to come home from work at 5, but it's usually 6 or 6:30. And so I can see why maybe she doesn't trust what I'm saying, or I can't, I can see why he's not really trusting me in some of these things. So I had them pick their top 2, and we talk about the impact of that on their relationship. And then we also identify parts of the acronym that they feel like, I'm nailing this. I got this one. I'm good at this one. And we want to identify the strengths that they already have. We don't want them to be, leaving the session defeated because they aren't very good at 1 or 2 or 3 of the 7. So we want to be able to identify the things that they're doing well also. And then I also put in a plug here from Brene Brown's information about trusting ourselves. So I have them kind of reflect on times when they haven't shown up, when they created boundaries, but they didn't honor them, or when they, said they were going to start that new workout routine, and they just haven't been able to do it, and they still feel, not very good, and they, I wish I could do that. And so I haven't really been reliable, and so I don't really trust myself to be able to start something or to finish something, or whatever it is. And so we want them to be able to identify for themselves, like, how much do they trust themselves just in everyday life, and then how does that relate to being able, like, trusting yourself in the relationship as well. And that kind of leads into our I Trust You activity. And this one is from Malcolm and his colleagues in this book, Helping Couples Get Past an Affair. This is a little bit scenario, but it works really well with new relationships too. I can do a lot of premarital work, and part of this, I think this comes out really well because I give them a sheet of paper and they create 5 columns. And in the first column, it is, I trust you too. And then they write things they trust them to do. And then the second column, it's, I trust you with. So I trust you to these things. I trust you with these things. And then the next column is, I don't trust you to. I don't trust you to follow through. I don't trust you to come home at the same time, right? And then I don't trust you with. I don't trust you with my feelings, because when I tell you it, you are dismissive of whatever that happens. They don't generally have that kind of language right away, but that's essentially what they're saying. And then the last column is, I have some trust, but not full trust regarding these things. And so in those 5 lists. So again, depending on what we've talked about, where we are, what we've been working on, I might do this in session with them, or I might give this for homework. So you can kind of do that depending on what works for you. And in the book, they talk about how they want couples to work together to maximize the likelihood that they will be successful in promoting a broader sense of trust over time. And so we want to, if we think about one partner being the one who kind of exposes themselves to the vulnerability and risk of the other person, we want to kind of start with some really small things if we're working with trust that's been broken. And so we use really small experiences that, if they don't happen, they aren't detrimental to the whole relationship. And so I have them fill this out. We talk about it, we discuss, and then we generally fall back on the braving. What can we do here then to increase trust in our relationship? The last one that I'm going to share with you tonight is the shoulds to the coulds or cans. And this comes from Carly LeBaron's book, Shattering the Porcelain, Overcoming Perfectionism and People Pleasing and Becoming the Real You. I would highly recommend this. It's a good one. And she has a lot of great tips in there. But for tonight, I'm going to talk about them and how I use it with setting boundaries, and starting with self-compassion and self-love. So I generally have the individuals take a sheet of paper and they make 2 columns. One is should, and the other is could or can. And I have them write should statements in the one column, and then in the other column, a chance to write a new statement that allows for a softer approach, but still allows them to adhere to their positive morals or values. Because generally a should statement is motivated by a value. It's just not executed in a way that cares for self or sometimes for the other person. So for example, in the should column, this is a super common one. I should say yes to my partner when they want to have sex. Super common and I should. And so in the could or the can, they might come up with a statement that sounds something like, I can say yes to sex if it sounds good to me, or if it works for me, or if I want to. And the value here, we can kind of discuss what the value is, but the value is like charity. Like, I want to be able to connect to my partner, and I want to be able to, be part of that connecting relationship. I want to be able to care for them. I want to be able to express love. And so we're just shifting this from being able to have some allowance to self and to the other person. And what this starts to do is to say, I can honor me and I can honor you. And I don't have to give in to some of these really big expectations or unspoken expectations that can kind of cripple trust in the relationship. And we talk about, like, if they don't feel comfortable saying that, then we can talk about what is, what's missing, what could we do, what would you need, what do you need inside of you to be able to start to have some self-compassion or love, and then be able to build trust on that. In her book, Dr. LeBaron talks about several different techniques to use for different cognitive distortions in terms of this people pleasing. And I think people pleasing and the lack of boundaries can go hand in hand. Those who struggle to have boundaries often are people pleasers, because they worry about being mean. And sometimes when we start to set boundaries, it does feel mean to the other person because they're not used to it. And in a relationship where boundaries are, the lack of boundaries is really working for them, then the introduction of them makes that really hard. And so we know that systems like homeostasis, and so for the ability to keep homeostasis, we kind of fight back sometimes. But when we have self-compassion and self-love, we can hold both what is important to me and being okay with the discomfort of having somebody else be uncomfortable or have feelings. And so I had a great friend one time said to me that so much of life is about the ability to increase our capacity for discomfort. And I think that is so true. And you can kind of see it everywhere. So these are just a couple of, examples for how we can actively start building and talking about trust and relationships in therapy. I think sometimes it's super hard. And so these are just ways that I have kind of put together and learned over my time in working with couples, dealing with all sorts of trust issues, or learning how to build trust in their relationship. And so I hope these are helpful for you. I'm going to wrap up my time here, and I'll just open it up for questions. Here's a couple of books that I've kind of referenced. And Brene Brown's Braving the Wilderness or Dare to Lead are also good books that I've enjoyed over the years. So, Alexis,
Awesome.
to you.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much. I really loved that. And thanks for sharing those last minute books too.
Yeah, for sure.
We'll go ahead and just, whatever works, you can stay there. People might ask to go back to those resources, but whatever.
I could send something out if you want to do that. So either way.
Yeah, great. I'd love that. So our first question is, how do I build back trust after doing something that broke the trust of my partner?
Good question. So I would first take a look at where did the breakdown happen, and look at, like, what are my behaviors that contribute to that? What are my thoughts or beliefs that contribute to that? What are our emotions that contribute to that? And then what are some really small ways that you can start to, on your end, make those small steps to create trust? I think one of the challenges is that I can do all that I can and the rest is up to my partner. And so part of this is a partner who's willing to extend the trust and being willing to see the effort given. But I think it's our responsibility to identify it and be able to slowly see places where we can make some steps.
I love that. Our next question is, what if there wasn't a betrayal that you did, but your partner still struggles trusting you from past relationships?
Yes, that's a hard one, right? So we all come with our own baggage into relationships. We just do. And so it might mean that there needs to be some individual work that happens to kind of heal from whatever it was. But I really think that a partner, in working with a couple, a partner can be a witness to some of the healing. And it's helpful if we are able to say, like, my partner now is not so-and-so, right? It's not Joey back there. It's actually this person. And I think there's a ton of patience that has to come in when we talk about building trust. And it would be important for, if your partner just isn't trusting you, it's super important for you to be consistent. It's super important for you to continue working through braving, right? To continue finding ways to stay trustworthy as you do this. And along the way, whatever is happening gives you good information for what you maybe need to do or ask for or whatever is next. But I think it's super hard when we all come with our own baggage and it impacts the current relationship that we're in, for sure.
I love that idea that you brought up about just like really witnessing your partner and being willing to just like work through it with patience. I think that that's really, really
Yeah,
beautiful and well said.
I think if we can have compassion and not judgment, then we can kind of, be present with whatever's happening. It doesn't mean it's easy by any means. But I think it does allow for the safe space for a partner to land.
Yeah, totally. Which is actually the next one is kind of about consistency.
Okay.
It says, what if outside things make us less consistent or reliable? Um, I recently had a big family emergency happen, and I haven't been able to show up for my long distance partner as much as I would like to. What would you prescribe for me to handle that well?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think long distance is hard in general. But this is where if trust previously is present in the relationship, then it's likely that your partner knows that you have shown up before and they can trust that you're going to kind of come around and they'll be able to have some compassion for the situation. But I also think that it's really important for you to be able to find maybe small ways that you could show up. Maybe it's not in the same way as you did before, but you could find some small ways that you could be consistent in. I think the other thing here is to just acknowledge what's happening. Hey, I know that I am not showing up the way that I want to. And, I'm sorry. I know that, I'm doing this, and this to kind of help myself get back to the place where I can kind of show up and be myself. So sometimes just saying it helps because then the partner isn't like, I think sometimes if we just not ignore, but if we don't make it obvious, then sometimes they're like, do they even know? Like, do they even notice what's happening for me? Right. So if we can just be accountable for the fact that I'm just not showing up right now. And I know, and I'm sorry. And, I am going to come back around. It's just taking me a little bit of time.
Yeah, I love that idea, that like balance of like ownership and also like acceptance, I guess, of like the situations. I think that's really
Yeah, and if you have trust built already, then they know, they don't worry, right? They know that you're going to come back around because you have been trustworthy and consistent prior to that.
yeah, for sure.
And if you haven't been, start. Find one thing that you can just keep doing all the time.
I love that idea of finding one thing to keep doing. What do you recommend as maybe like easy ones to kind of start with and practice with as like one thing to be consistent with that you've seen in couples you've worked with before?
Yeah, I would say follow through. So if you say like, I'm gonna leave work at 5 and you don't, I would say, sometimes we say 5 o'clock because we think that's the time that our partner wants us to leave. But if we could say, hey, today is a busy day, it's probably going to be 5:30. I'll check in with you a little bit later to kind of verify that. Then I'm more honest and reliable because I just pushed it back to where I think is real, not what I think my partner wants me to say. I think sometimes we get stuck in that. I think this is what my partner wants, so that's what I'm going to say, but we don't have any ability to follow through with that. So if we can let go of the fear of what our partner is going to say, then I think we can actually follow through a little bit more consistently. So I would say if you can pick something to do, like you agreed to do the trash. So just be consistent in taking out the trash, or be consistent in the thing that you said you would do. And Brene Brown kind of talks about how saying no, this is where saying no comes in handy, because if I have the boundary of saying no, then I don't overwhelm my system with things that I'm not able to follow through with. So pick small things, It could be house chores. It could be like, I'm going to text you every day, so you better be sure you text every day, or, just small things that don't seem to be big, but because I did it because I said I would, it actually is a small moment of building trust. I hope that was helpful.
Yeah, that was. Our next question is, do you think doing the should to could can statements can be done without a mediator? Could I send this home with my clients? Have you seen this better with in-office activity or at-home activity?
Totally. I think you can do it both. One of the challenges can be that they struggle to know how to turn the should into a could or a can. So they might need a little bit of help in the beginning to understand the shift in that. But once they can, I think they can talk about it at home. And generally it turns into like a values conversation too. Like, oh, I didn't realize you valued, consistency, or I didn't realize you valued, I don't know, charity, right? I didn't, sometimes just the recognition of, oh, this is what the motivation was, is helpful for ourselves and for our partner. So it can totally be done at home. Now, I will say that all of this is for like, you just have to kind of gauge, right? If your couple is going through a really heavy betrayal, that's totally different than a premarital couple or newlyweds or something like that. So you just have to kind of be in tune with your clients, but it can totally be done at home.
Perfect. Our next question is, my partner always identifies my faults, and I feel like she does not identify her own. How can I help her with that identifying two faults that she has, like you did during the intervention slide?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think we are all guilty of this. It's so much easier to see somebody else's than to see our own sometimes. But it's so much easier to blame ourselves than other people. It's the weirdest thing, I think. We're just kind of, people are interesting. So I would say that the purpose is to be, it's to be about you, right? So if you have these two things that I do that break trust, then it's hard to focus on what my partner does, right? One of the challenges that I do see is that a partner might be like, well, that's not where you're breaking down trust, right? So they disagree about maybe where their partner breaks down trust. And that's where, as a therapist, you kind of have to kind of step in and say like, okay, so let's take a second real quick, and we're not gonna be critical of what we see, what our partner sees, but there's some space here for us to discuss. But first we're gonna listen and talk about ourselves. Then we can talk about each other, but first self.
Yeah, I wonder if that even gets into like that values conversation again, like you were talking about, just like seeing a person and what they value and just listening.
Yep.
That's awesome. Our next question is, I'm scared to tell my spouse what I do not trust about them. Do you have any advice for first steps?
My advice would be to say, hey, I'm noticing that trust is a really important thing for me, and I'm trying to be a little bit more trustworthy myself. And so I'm just going to share with you the things that I'm trying to do better to build trust in our relationship. I would start with the self. If we start with, you stink, that's just not a very good approach. It just doesn't really welcome cooperation or care. So I would always start with myself. Hey, this is important to me, and this is how I'm trying to do. And if they are interested, they could ask like, oh, like, how are you doing that? Or what are you doing? Or, you could say like, you might be able to say, I worry about trust in our relationship, and I'm wondering if there's a way for us to be able to build trust together. This is what I'm kind of thinking. These are the places where I'm going to start. What do you think would be good for you? But if you lead with trust is important to me, and I worry that it's not there, you kind of start with my experience, then it's a little bit easier than you aren't doing all of these things that help me feel safe. Right.
Yeah. The next one I think is actually a piggyback off of that one, which is, how do I handle defensiveness around those kind of conversations?
Well, um, here's what I would say. If you want to practice building trust, you can start with generosity. So you can start with my partner, whatever my partner said that's making me defensive, I'm going to try to assume generous things about their intentions, thoughts, or feelings, right? So I could even start there with building trust because that creates safety in the relationship. And in terms of like if it's about the partner being defensive, the best way to soften defensiveness is to not lead with blame. So however you're doing the conversation, if you can keep from leading with blame, that will be far better. The example I always give is like if I punch you, I'm kind of opening myself to a punch back. Right? It's not really fair for me to say, well, I'm going to punch you, but I'd really like for you to hug me back. Right? So if we can with less blame, then it generally sounds better. And, traditional therapy would say like start with I statements. I feel dismissed when we have this conversation and defensiveness is in the air, and I because it shuts me down. And that's a much softer approach than you don't ever listen to me, you don't, whatever. So
yeah,
start with generosity yourself, and then if their partner's being defensive, start with less blame and more I statements.
Perfect. Someone wants you to go back to the page with the books on it so that they can screenshot it. Can you do that really quick?
Yeah, I can totally do that.
Perfect.
Let me find it. I'll share my screen here. So can you see me when I highlight this?
Yeah.
Okay, so helping couples get past the affair and shattering the porcelain. Those are the two that have like some practical things. Any Brene Brown's book, Dare to Lead, I don't have that on here. But her book is Dare to Lead. That's a good one to do. Her book, Braving the Wilderness, is also really good. And she has a lot of things online as well that are short videos that you could watch, Sympathy versus Empathy. She has a really good video that's like 5 minutes about boundaries, and she basically says that love without boundaries isn't love, and generosity without boundaries isn't generosity. And so it's just a really interesting way to kind of think about we are actually better humans when we have boundaries. We might not make everybody happy, but we are more kind. So
I love that. And we have just a couple more minutes, so I'd love to give you the opportunity just to let people see how they can contact you. I know you had that slide, but I feel like we went past it really quick. So if somebody wants resources, wants to learn more about you, where can they find you?
Yeah, for sure. So you can email me at this email. I didn't put my phone number on there mainly because I just forgot. So, you could call or text me at 801-709-1526. But I'm super responsive to my email. So I'd be happy to share my slides or share resources, or I have lots of like paper activities that I do. It was really hard for me to kind of like narrow down to just a couple. So
I love that. Well, thank you so much for sharing tonight, Kayla. This was such a good presentation.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. And once again, thank you for everyone that joined us tonight for this webinar. We're so grateful for your questions and your participation. Once again, if you did attend this webinar for the CEU credit, make sure to stay until the end of the webinar. The survey that you need for your certificate will automatically load onto the screen, and then you'll get an email from the Utah Marriage Commission with your certificate. If for some reason it doesn't load onto your screen, please just email us at marriagecommission@usu.edu, and we can make sure that you get that survey and certificate. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your night.
Thanks.
Bye.